And I want to start off by saying a huge thank you to the many organisations and individuals who went above and beyond in assisting the local communities impacted by ex-Cyclone Alfred. It was the best of Australians that we saw, with so many communities rallying and services, more often than not volunteers, that came to the aid and support of so many communities to ensure there was that level of preparedness to try and mitigate the likely severe impact of the cyclone. I think it was really interesting to see the role the Bureau of Meteorology played in providing that early warning and the ongoing information, because of course no one controls nature and it has a mind of its own, and so that additional time that was allowed with that early warning process, which allowed for that greater preparation for so many of those communities, which highlights the importance of having that visibility, that satellite capability, that information to be able to predict when these events hit. Because unfortunately, as has been established by experts, many of predicted patterns are changing as our environment is changing and warming. And while cyclones are predicted to be less frequent, they are predicted to be much more severe when they hit as a result of fast warming water temperatures, which means we have supercharged amounts of humidity in the atmosphere, and it makes for much greater downpours of rain, but also weather events and that will hit with a severity that really puts at risk the safety of communities and will devastate them economically. The aftermath of ex-tropical cyclone Alfred is telling, and it was took even centre stage when you look at the budget recently delivered by the government, but it has to be part of our economic planning for the future. So in this aftermath, this is for one event that unravelled over the course of about a week, but the clean-up will go on for much, much longer. We see some more than 300,000 homes losing power, some 644 properties with flood damage, including 112 where it is severe damage. 97 of those have been affected by flooding in just 2022 and had not even yet been repaired. So the idea that these are individual events that will happen from time to time is simply not the reality anymore. We know these events come successively, they batter communities, they overwhelm capacity to respond, and they will overwhelm that very well-meaning volunteer workforce that we have that comes to the aid of communities. But we need to move beyond that capacity. We have to put in place more security and preparedness for these communities. The infrastructure damages estimated that are in the hundreds of millions. So the aftermath of ex-Cyclone Alfred underscores Australia's vulnerability as a continent to extreme weather events. I think in the same week that we were talking about the ex-tropical cyclone Alfred, we had other parts of Australia grappling with flooding, we had other parts grappling with bushfires. The reality is we are incredibly exposed as a continent to these changing events. We're feeling the impacts of our warming climate, and without interventions, communities will continue to suffer. And whilst it's incredibly important that we continue to mitigate, we cannot keep making this problem worse. So we must act in terms of the mitigation piece and be ambitious on our emissions reduction. We must at the same time build in adaptation and resilience. Communities, individual households should not be left holding the bag for a failure of policy for some last 20, 30 years' time, nationally and globally. That adaptation and resilience building piece must become a priority, and sadly, the most recent budget completely fails to address the needs. So we need to take action now to keep our communities safe, and safe today, but into the future as well. These are really big challenges, and whilst there will be a lot of focus, rightly so, on the insurance industry to make sure that those with premiums are able to fully get the benefit of having paid for so many years, the reality is that 1 in 5 Australians surveyed are underinsured or uninsured, which means when these events strike, quite a significant proportion of people within our community stand to lose nearly the complete or up to 75% of all net worth that they have accumulated during their working life, because too often it is heavily focused in the family home. The Australian Institute report recently found that, yes, 1 in 5 homeowners are underinsured or not insured. So that equals to some $2 trillion worth of properties at risk, as the bulk of the Australian population lives within 50 kilometres of our coastline. So I think it really becomes an economic imperative for anyone wanting to form government to have a focus on building that resilience. We see the price of climate change is costed in risk of insurance premiums. And it's a really telling industry, because insurance companies price risk on a yearly basis. So every year, that change that is happening, whether you want to believe the causes or want to believe that we have an impact on it or not, they look at the financial model, they cost risk, and they build it into that. And whether you want to believe it or not, you are paying for it. Whether you are directly impacted or not, you are paying for it. This is how the model works. And it exposes a huge issue from an economic management for Australia. So we have to look at that and deal with it and bring everyone to the table to solve it. There must, of course, always be that real scrutiny of insurers to make sure there is no price gouging, that there is compliance and quick processing. But the reality is, as other jurisdictions have found, other countries, insurers will choose to vacate the market if the risk simply becomes too high, or they will choose to just not insure for certain risks. On the wake of the LA fires, we're finding that a huge proportion of people impacted there, in fact, had only very recently found themselves to be no longer have insurance, which leaves a huge problem when so much damage is caused. So it's a really high-stakes roadmap. And the ex-Cyclone Alfred highlights the urgent need for immediate action to keep communities safe against climate change. So I've called on a national framework for adaptation, which means legislating an independent climate change risk assessments every 5 years to identify and address significant climate risks, because every community will have different needs. Some communities will need cool rooms and opportunities to escape heat. The other communities will need to deal with drought, flooding, coastal erosion, bushfire. Their risks are different in different communities, and we must have a national plan to address that. Obviously, going hand in hand, we must also legislate for the government of the day to have a national adaptation plan, outlining strategies, policies, proposals to mitigate the identified risks, and complete with an implementation timeframe and monitoring indicators. This can't just be left to whoever is in government to care about that community because it's a marginal seat that they care about. There has to be a properly managed plan for that adaptation and resilience building. Of course, it will cost, and that's why I'm calling for sustainable funding with a $10 billion climate resilience fund to secure that safety for our communities, to assist local government in doing the kind of infrastructure change that will build their resilience. And that can be fully funded through the budget, through redistributing priorities, so that rather than continuing to do cream on top to mining companies through fossil fuel credits, that we actually start to redirect that to households, to local governments, so that they can be safe and lower their insurance premiums. So this plan is a comprehensive plan that I have put to both sides of government that want to form, both sides of politics who want to form government, because we know we can't leave householders left holding the bag. Currently, they are paying for incredible increases in insurance premiums. They've risen by 32% since 2022 alone. This is an unsustainable trajectory. We can't also leave local governments alone to deal with this problem, and yet they are on the front line. When things fall apart or when events strike, it is them that are having to deal with it. So we must put in place a capacity for local governments to build that resilience. And it can't be left to local residents to pay for it through council rates to local government. It is simply unacceptable that state governments are transferring onto our local governments a lot of this emergency response fees and cost, and ultimately it is the individual residents that pay for it. So we know the economic savings. There is a resilience dividend. For every $1 invested in resilience building, we save $11 on disaster recovery. Now, in the most recent budget, the estimated cost of ex-Cyclone Alfred will rise to $13.8 billion. We can do so much better if we start building adaptation and resilience.